7:02 a.m. Every faucet in my neighborhood let out the same horrible sound, one sharp metallic cough, then nothing. Within seconds, people were running outside in towels, shouting, shaking hoses, slamming faucets like they could beat water back into the pipes. HOA golf carts screeched through the streets, Cheryl the president ordering emergency protocols like she was running a disaster zone. Meanwhile, I stood on my porch, drinking the last of my stored coffee, watching it all unfold. They thought cutting my water would teach me a lesson. What they still don't know is, the real lesson hasn't begun yet. Most people move to Maple Ridge Estates for the same three reasons: quiet streets, clean sidewalks, and the illusion that rules can keep life predictable. I moved here for none of those things. Truth is, years before the HOA existed, long before the golf carts and color-coordinated mailboxes, I bought a dusty piece of land on the eastern edge of town because it was the only place I'd found that felt like mine. Arizona sun, stubborn soil, no neighbors for half a mile. Perfect. I was coming off a divorce and a decade of grinding through civil engineering contracts, half of them arguments about groundwater flow and the other half about budgets. I was tired, burnt out, and ready for silence. The first thing I built wasn't the house. It was the well. A real one. Permitted, drilled, documented, inspected. 1,800 feet of steel casing, sunk directly into one of the cleanest aquifers in the region. I welded some of the reinforcement myself, poured the concrete apron by hand, installed a solar-powered pump with a backup generator I buried underground. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Independent, reliable, untouchable. Then the town grew. Then the developers came. Then the planned community popped up around me like a beige mushroom colony. And eventually, Maple Ridge Estates HOA convinced the county to fold my parcel into their service boundary. Trash pickup and street lighting? Sure. But water? No. I kept that one line off the grid, the way it was always meant to be. My daughter Maddie was about 7 when we moved into the finished house. She's 13 now, sharp, curious, sarcastic, in a way that feels like justice rather than rebellion. She paints glow-in-the-dark constellations on her blackout curtains, names every cactus in the yard, and carries a sketchbook everywhere. The well has always been part of her life. She grew up listening to the soft hum of the pump like other kids grow up hearing city buses. For years, things were fine, quiet, stable. Then Cheryl Langford arrived. Cheryl moved in, like a general arriving to take command of a base she'd been promised in a dream. Power blazer, rigid smile, the kind of walk that suggested she mentally measured property values with every step. Within months, she campaigned her way into the HOA presidency and rewrote half the bylaws. Suddenly, everything had a rule. Front porch light too warm? Citation. Native plants instead of decorative shrubs? Citation. Backup generator visible from the street, even though mine was buried? Citation. I ignored them all. Politely, at first. Then not so politely, because none of those rules applied to me. My land existed before her HOA ever held its first meeting. My well certainly did. But Cheryl didn't like exceptions. Exceptions meant she wasn't fully in control. Most people move to Maple Ridge Estates for the same three reasons: quiet streets, clean sidewalks, and the illusion that rules can keep life predictable. I moved here for none of those things. Truth is, years before the HOA existed, long before the golf carts and color-coordinated mailboxes, I bought a dusty piece of land on the eastern edge of town because it was the only place I'd found that felt like mine. Arizona sun, stubborn soil, no neighbors for half a mile. Perfect. I welded some of the reinforcement myself, poured the concrete apron by hand, installed a solar-powered pump with a backup generator I buried underground. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Independent, reliable, untouchable. Then the town grew. Then the developers came. Then the planned community popped up around me like a beige mushroom colony. And eventually, Maple Ridge Estates HOA convinced the county to fold my parcel into their service boundary. Trash pickup and street lighting? Sure. When he told me they shut off my water access, he said it with the kind of casual authority you'd use to announce a library fee. I told him I was on a private well. He told me I was misinformed. And right there on my own property, listening to a grown man in a logo polo explain my own water system to me, I realized something important. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't even about violations. This was personal, and Maple Ridge Estates had no idea who they'd just picked a fight with. The morning after Todd informed me that my water had been shut off, The real war began quiet at first, like a distant engine warming up, then louder, bolder, and impossible to ignore. I woke before sunrise out of habit, went to the kitchen sink, turned the handle, and listened as the faucet coughed a dry, metallic gasp, the same sound the whole neighborhood would hear a few days later. I didn't curse, I didn't panic. I just stared at the empty stream and felt something old and steady rise in my chest. They actually did it. They'd capped a private well. Not even incompetence could explain that. That was a choice. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The desert air was cool, the kind of cool that only lasts 15 minutes before the sun turns everything to dust. I walked around the house to the east side, where the access pipe ran from the underground pump system up to the filtration housing. And there it was. A temporary emergency cap, slapped onto my outflow line with an orange tag that read, "Property of Maple Ridge Estates HOA, do not remove." I actually laughed. Not a joke laugh, one of those sharp, disbelieving breaths that forces its way out because silence isn't strong enough. They'd even used the wrong kind of clamp. Cheap plastic, the kind that cracks in summer heat. I took pictures. Wide shots, close shots, angles with the serial number visible. Then I photographed the footprint impressions in the gravel Todd's size 11 New Balance shoes. He always wore the same pair. You could clock his approach by the crunch of those soles. But photographs were only the beginning. Because when an HOA crosses into infrastructure, that's not a citation, that's a crime. By 9 a.m., 3 new violation letters were shoved into my mailbox, literally jammed, edges crumpled, like someone angry folded them. All 3 were signed by Cheryl. Citation Hasson, grass exceeding 6 inches. I didn't have grass. I had gravel, cacti, and a city-approved xeriscape plan. Citation #2, non-uniform window coverings visible from the street. Translation: Maddie's hand-painted constellation curtain, the one she created after learning Orion, was her mom's favorite. Citation #3, unauthorized equipment storage. My backup generator. The same generator that wasn't visible from anywhere unless someone trespassed onto my property. This wasn't rule enforcement. This was punishment. I spread the letters on the kitchen table like evidence at trial. Maddie came downstairs mid-yawn, hair tangled, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Why isn't the shower working?" she muttered. I didn't want to drag her into this, but lying felt worse. "The HOA capped our well," I said softly. "They're trying to force me to pay fines." She blinked once, then twice. And then, in perfect 13-year-old fashion, she frowned and said, "They're idiots." I cracked a smile. "Yeah," I whispered. "They are." She poured cereal. I photographed the violation letters. And while she ate, I logged into the HOA's online portal. What I saw made something cold settle in my stomach. My account showed $4,628, due almost all invented in the past 48 hours. But worse than that were 2 lines in small gray font at the bottom. Status: delinquent. Utility access: suspended, administrative hold. The HOA had marked me as someone they could legally punish. They thought a software tag made it true. I clicked the Update History log. The changes were made at 2:17 a.m. by C. Langford. She hadn't even tried to hide it. You don't fight people like Cheryl by yelling. People like her feed on confrontation, they twist it into justification. No, you fight them the way you fight bad engineering. You document. You verify. You eliminate a margin for error. And so I began. I mapped every inch of the neighborhood's water system using public zoning records and satellite overlays. On my laptop screen, the subdivision looked like a spiderweb, thin lines branching from a central junction near the clubhouse. But one thicker line caught my eye. A line labeled Temp Access, Auxiliary Feed. I followed it. The line ran directly into my parcel, into my well's outflow. They hadn't just capped me. They had connected themselves to my source. Without permits, without easement, without the slightest shadow of legality, my pulse didn't spike. My breathing didn't change. What I felt was something far steadier, the clean, quiet certainty that they had just handed me everything I needed. Because the moment a private entity taps into a licensed water source without the owner's consent, they're not just breaking rules. They're committing resource theft, and Cheryl had signed her name all over it. At noon, I called in a favor. Luis Alvarez, old friend, county utility engineer, the only guy I knew who could recite water code while eating a burrito. Years ago, I'd helped him expose a developer who forged drainage approvals. He owed me one. Tell me straight, I said. Does Maple Ridge have any authority over private wells? He snorted. HOAs barely have authority over mailboxes. No, Ethan, they have zero jurisdiction. If they touched your system, they're dead in the water. Oh, pun unintended, but accurate. Can you check if they filed anything recently? Any permits, easements? He called me back in under 2 hours. No filings, no jurisdiction, no water provider registration. In fact, he paused. Their connection? If they did splice into your system, that's a violation that can get referred to the DA. I nodded slowly. Thanks, Luis. He said, what are you going to do? I looked at the desert horizon through my window. Quiet, still, sun-baked. I'm going to fix a mistake, I said, and make sure they understand what they touched. That night, after Maddie fell asleep, I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the eastern edge of my property, to the small, weatherproof vault where I'd built my manual override installed years ago, just in case. I unlocked it, turned the valve. The pump sighed, pressure dropped, and for the first time in 15 years, the entire system went still. The HOA's stolen lifeline went silent. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just closed the vault and whispered, Lesson 1, end of. Because everything they'd done to me was about to echo through every faucet in Maple Ridge Estates. And tomorrow, the real escalation would begin. By the next morning, Maple Ridge Estates sounded like someone had unplugged the entire town. Sprinklers hissed nothing but air. Pool pumps rattled like broken engines. Neighbors stumbled outside holding empty mugs and dripping toothbrushes, staring at their faucets like they'd personally betrayed them. And in the center of the chaos stood Cheryl Langford, HOA president, self-appointed queen of hydropower, sweating through a coral blazer while shouting into a walkie-talkie. Activate emergency protocol. Check the main line. Check every line. There was no main line. I watched from my porch, drinking the last of my stored coffee. Not smug, not smiling, just steady. The whole neighborhood was discovering the truth the hard way. Without my well, Maple Ridge didn't have water. Around Saint A.M., the first neighbor approached my driveway carrying 2 empty-gallon jugs. Ethan, is your water still working? I nodded and filled them from my backup tank. Soon, more families showed up, kids holding pitchers, adults carrying coolers. Some apologized for believing the HOA. Some didn't say anything at all. But every single one looked exhausted. Helping them wasn't strategy. It was the right thing to do. And it didn't go unnoticed. By 11:15 a.m., 2 city vehicles rolled into the neighborhood, a white utility truck and a sedan with the county seal. Out stepped Luis Alvarez, my old engineering colleague, followed by a sharp-looking woman with a tablet. Rebecca Lynn, Municipal Compliance. Cheryl practically sprinted at them. Finally, our community is under attack. This man, she jabbed a finger toward me, has shut off shared utilities. Rebecca didn't even blink. Is your HOA registered as a water provider? Cheryl opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Well, there's an easement. Show me, Rebecca said. We walked to the eastern edge of my property. Luis crouched beside the illegal splice cheap clamp, orange HOA tag, everything still exactly as I'd photographed. Who installed this? He asked. Cheryl lifted her chin. It has always been part of our emergency access. Rebecca tapped her tablet. Permit number? Cheryl hesitated. It was implied. Luis snorted. Implied consent for groundwater extraction? Not a chance. Rebecca took a final photo and stood. Mrs. Langford, this is unauthorized utility access to a private water system. That is trespass, code violation, and resource interference. You could feel the shift. Neighbors leaned in. Todd took a step back. Cheryl's face lost a full shade of color. Rebecca turned to me. Mr. Cole, you were fully within your legal rights to close this line. In fact, leaving it open could have caused contamination and pressure instability. You acted correctly. Gasps from the crowd, then whispers, then the first spark of anger. Not at me, at her. He lied to us? She said it was the city. They shut his water off first? Rebecca continued, voice calm but lethal. The HOA will remove this illegal connection within 14 days. You will issue a correction notice to every resident today. Failure to comply may result in municipal fines and referral for civil action. Cheryl swallowed. We can discuss alternative. No, Rebecca said. This isn't a negotiation. Luis gave me a quiet nod before heading back to the truck. The message was clear. I wasn't the problem here. As the officials left, Cheryl stomped toward me, voice shaking more from fear than anger. You've embarrassed the entire community. You'll regret this. I met her eyes. No, I said. I'm just done letting you take what isn't yours. Behind her, a dozen neighbors watched in silence, arms crossed, expressions hardening. For the first time since Cheryl took over Maple Ridge, her power wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. When the city trucks rolled out of Maple Ridge that afternoon, a strange quiet settled over the neighborhood. Not the usual morning calm or the HOA-mandated quiet hours silence, this was different. It felt like hundreds of people holding the same breath at the same time, finally realizing the oxygen they'd been living on came from a very small group of very controlling hands. And those hands had just been slapped away. By sunset, my phone buzzed nonstop, not with threats, but with messages from neighbors. Ethan, we didn't know. Is the well really yours? What else did the HOA lie about? I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I uploaded a single link to the community portal. Coal, well, evidence, archive. Zip, permits, deeds, photos of the illegal tap, screenshots of the software flags, the city's violation, everything. I wrote one sentence. Everyone deserves to know the truth. That was it. Within an hour, comments exploded, and they weren't aimed at me, they were aimed at her. By the next morning, Jen from down the street showed up at my door with a clipboard, not water jugs this time. 53 signatures, she said. Special election to remove Cheryl. We need you at the meeting. I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't chasing revenge. I just wanted my life back. But Maddie looked up from her cereal and said, Dad, you stood up. You should finish it. So I went. The clubhouse overflowed standing room only, people crowding the doorway. The air conditioning rattled like even it was nervous. Cheryl sat up front in a crisp navy blazer this time, maybe hoping the color made her look more official. It didn't. Brad, the treasurer, cleared his throat. We're here to address the petition submitted by residents. Namely, the vote to remove the standing HOA president. Cheryl shot up instantly. This is a witch hunt, she snapped. You people don't understand the pressure I'm under. I've protected this community for years. A voice from the back answered, You shut off a man's private well. Another, You fined my kid for chalk drawings. Another, You lied about the water. It spread like a ripple, a collective release of years of tiny humiliations people had swallowed because they thought they had to. Brad looked at me. Mr. Cole, anything to add? I simply shook my head. The evidence is already in everyone's hands, I said. Make the decision you think is right. No speeches, no dramatics, just truth. The vote took 10 minutes, simple paper ballots dropped into a cardboard box supervised by 2 county volunteers. While they counted, Cheryl stared at me like she could burn holes through air. You think this makes you a hero? She hissed. No, I said quietly, just free. The volunteers returned. Brad read the result. 85 votes for removal, 9 against, 6 abstentions. Effective immediately, the HOA board is dissolved pending reformation. No applause. Just relief deep and unanimous. Cheryl didn't wait for the rest. She stormed out, her heels clicking like broken metronomes, climbed into her white SUV, and peeled out with a squeal of tires that probably violated her own noise policy. No one followed her. Over the next 60 days, Maple Ridge changed faster than I thought possible. A temporary resident council replaced the board. Meetings were public, budgets were transparent, violations required actual review instead of Cheryl's midnight clickfests. They asked me to serve as infrastructure advisor. I agreed, but only if 3 new bylaws were added. No HOA control over privately owned resources, ever. All citations reviewed by a resident panel, not board members. All meetings recorded and open, no exceptions. They passed unanimously. They even named the first rule the coal provision. Maddie loved that. It sounds like a superhero law, she said, hugging her sketchbook. 6 months later, Maple Ridge felt human again. Kids drew chalk galaxies on the sidewalk. Neighbors planted whatever they wanted, wildflowers, native sage, mismatched shrubs. People waved without fear of being fined for the wrong kind of wave. And the well? Steady as ever. The council installed a small metal marker beside it. Private well protected by community trust. One evening, as the sun turned the desert gold, Maddie sat beside me on the porch. Dad, she said, I think someday I want to study environmental law. I turned. Yeah? Why? She shrugged. Because you fixed something big. I want to learn how to fix things before they get that bad. I didn't know what to say. so I just nodded. The pump hummed beneath our feet, steady, reliable, honest. The HOA tried to weaponize water. Instead, water washed them away and left us something better in its place. A community that finally found its voice and learned never to give it up again.